little bit obsessed with forming habits. And I think it's because I've read so many books now where it's like, these are the things that can make a good life, and lots of it suggests that it's all connected with our habits, that our daily happinesses, that our success in career and life, and that our relationships with the people around us are all built by these habits that we can develop, and that we are very much in control of our lives and how we want them to go. And habits is the main one. Now, today I've got 20 fantastic books that all affected my life and helped me with how I think about habits and how I can cultivate and stay on track with habits that I want to develop, and how to try and step away from some of my bad habits. Some of them are going to be some of the like big name, obvious habit books. And some of them, I bet they are books you've never heard of before. That is the goal for today. All of these books taught me something and helped me something in my life. I'm Steffi from Books That Teach Us. Our book number 1 I'm going to start off with, these are not in any order, is The Energy Bus by John Gordon. Now, John Gordon is a motivational speaker. I'd not heard of him before I came across this book. And I just think this is a really lovely, sweet tale about achieving more happiness and positivity in your life. There's a little bit of leadership that links into there. Now, I'm not in a leadership role, but I still found this book quite helpful and motivational. It basically follows this sweet story of Grumpy George. Now, Grumpy George is down all the time. He's negative. He complains. He moans about his team at work. He moans about his boss. His wife isn't happy with him. His kids are quite neglected. His car breaks down and everything's going wrong for Grumpy George. Then along comes a bus, and it is driven by Joy, who is this lovely, cheerful character in our fable. And her whole idea is that every morning when George rides the bus to work, she is going to teach him some rule of happiness and positivity that will stop him being from Grumpy George. Now, I don't think there was anything revolutionary in this book, but it was just a little cute reminder of the things that we surround ourselves with are what we become. So if you're going to go to work and you're going to complain the whole time, then obviously your team are not going to get any joy out of being around you, and they're going to feel negative around you. And it also is going to probably make them complain in turn as well. So I think this was just a really healthy dose of a reminder of what vibes are you putting out there into the universe, and a reminder that a focus on positivity, while not being that toxic positivity side of things, can be really, really beneficial for everybody. George, of course, turned things around. He took on board all Joy's good advice for happiness. There's little step-by-step things at the end of each chapter. And I think it was just a really nice way to kick off building positive habits to make us all happier. Now, I've got 2 books next up by Robin Sharma, who I have mentioned before on my booktube channel. Now, he's known as being a motivational speaker, he's in leadership, and I wasn't really sure what to expect with his books, but I really found them just quietly motivational without being too in your face. So the first book I'm going to mention is called The 5 a.m. Club. Now, I have to wake up incredibly early for my teaching job. So I was like, okay, I'm going to read this book. Maybe it's going to inspire me to wake up early, get things done. And while it hasn't quite done that, my alarm already goes at 5:50 without having to implement the things from Robin Sharma's book. I think it had this really, really good idea of what he calls the 1 hour of focus time. And he recommends doing this at 5 in the morning. That might not be for everyone. I do think it really depends on your own circadian rhythm, your own work life. But I think it had this really nice idea of this hour that you can spend, that you divide into 20 minutes. Basically, you do 20 minutes of movement. So whether it's yoga if you wake up in the morning, whether it's a quick run, whether it's just stretching. I love dance workouts on YouTube. Something for 20 minutes a day that is linked to your health and exercise. I have read before that this can be more beneficial when you do it in the morning. However, that doesn't fit into my routine. So I've switched mine around a little bit. The other 20 was for for reflection. So Robin Sharma's very big into meditation and mindfulness. And this 20 minutes could be divided into 10 minutes meditation, 10 minutes journaling. I just think it's a really nice habit to build of having 20 minutes where you reflect on your day. There's more on that in some books later on as well, some good ways to do this. And just center yourself for the day ahead, or could be possibly at the end of your day as well, to just have some reflection time. I think that can actually make us all better human beings, to look at what went well in the day and what we want to focus on in the next day or the day ahead. And then you do 20 minutes that is dedicated to growth, your personal growth, your career growth, something where you sit down, you read a personal development book, like some of the ones that are on my list. Whether you spend 20 minutes listening to an expert or a TED talk, or you go and look at a journal of something you're interested in, whether you watch a YouTube tutorial to learn how to do something new. I think this is all really, really beneficial for leading a successful life. And I love this idea of not necessarily a power hour. That's something that one of the other authors talks about later on that I'll mention. But just this idea of dedicating these 20 minutes throughout the day. And I personally feel like it doesn't even need to be a whole hour together. I'm sure people have incredibly busy lives where they feel like that's not possible. But I feel like if you carve it up into 20 minutes, then that should be feasible. And one of the things that I do is I definitely spend 20 minutes reading every day without fail. So that's definitely one of the kind of good habits that I built as a result of this. And I think I want to focus more on the learning something new as well, because I have many, many passion projects going on that require a lot of my time and things that I also need to learn something new for. So yeah, the 5 a.m. club really motivated me to do that. It's quite a simple, easy read, which is also the same with my book number 3 recommendation, which is The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari. Again, a little bit like Grumpy George. This is a fable with some characters in it. There is Julian, who things are not going well. He's a successful lawyer, but he's not happy. And one of his previous colleagues goes off to the Himalayas, becomes a monk, and comes back and wants to spread the teachings to his old colleagues and in the US. And it's called The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari, because it's not about needing to be a hermit and give up all of your material possessions, but it's about finding that peace within your daily life. And I think for anyone who's spent some time alone, it is quite easy to be peaceful when you're alone. I personally found this during quarantine. I'm sure we've all experienced some similar things like this, but I actually had to do a hotel quarantine for 2 weeks, totally alone, when I first relocated back to Thailand for the second time. I think it was 15 days, 14 nights of only myself in a hotel room. Honestly, I was a little bit nervous going into it, and I had the best time. And I think I really resonated with this book then, because yeah, of course it's peace. It's about having that little moment of peace all throughout the day. And this is something that I've been guilty of, I'm sure some people here as well, when you have that lunch break at work and you don't take it and you work through it, or you sit and eat your sandwich in front of the laptop. And it's just such a terrible idea. So as a result of reading this book, one of the things I always try and do is I will go to another area of my classroom. I'm a teacher, and I will read a book and I will eat. And it's just this little, sometimes just 20 minutes, sometimes half an hour if I can, of peace in the middle of the day. In the book, it's quite hippie. But he does this thing of like meditation with a flower, and you look at this flower and look at it bloom, and you just spend this time doing it. And I thought that's so lovely to, I don't know, do that if you have like a flowering plant in your office or something like that, that just really resonated with me, of finding those moments of peace. And no one's going to give them to you, so you need to take them and build it into a regular habit. Book number 4, I have mentioned this book before because I think she's absolutely fantastic. It is Set Boundaries, Find Peace. This, what I've got here, is actually the workbook that accompanies it. I downloaded the other one on my Kindle, and it is by a psychologist and therapist called Nedra Glover Tawwab. And honestly, I think boundaries are so incredibly mixed up with habits. Like, how can you talk about habits without talking about boundaries? Whether it's work boundaries, relationship boundaries, boundaries with yourself around technology, just really important. So I think one of the main takeaways from me is that you have to set boundaries with people, and it is kind to set a boundary, and it needs to be a clear boundary. And I think I'm quite good at having some very clear boundaries for work. So, for example, I've had a few conversations with colleagues previously who are like, oh, someone's messaging me, emailing me in the evenings. Why are you checking your work emails in the evening? Like, to me, that is an absolute hard boundary. I do not check my work emails. I actually can't check my work emails on my personal device. I don't think that's right. And I think that's a very strong, firm work boundary for me. And I think if other people did it, they'd probably feel a lot of relief from that too. So things like that, it's kind of a boundary that's linked in with a habit. Like, I do not look at work things outside of my work hours. And another, I'm still working on some of my boundaries in relationships, but I think some of them, one of the main ones is like just not saying yes to things straight away, trying to check in with myself, or when someone invites me to things or asks me for something, just really think about like, do I want to do that? Is that going to be good for our relationship, such as, say, lending money to a friend? Is that something that I want to do? Am I enabling that person? Just really important questions, like things like that. So I think it's really made me take a beat when people make a request of me and think about, am I doing that out of guilt? Am I doing it because I genuinely want to, and it's coming from a place of love? So I think that's really, really essential. I also think one of the main things that Nedra shares about boundaries as well is that there is no way you can set a boundary and not feel guilty. And I think that was really, really helpful for me to learn that is, okay, I'm always going to feel this guilt here, particularly if you've been bad at setting boundaries in the past, like I definitely have. And I think one of the other big things in this book was about setting those self boundaries. So I have a really hard self boundary in the morning that I will not look at anything on my phone until I'm commuting and I'm on the train to. I think one of the main things for me with this was that you have that thing of, you've had this nice good night's sleep, hopefully, and then you open up your phone and then kind of you let in everything. And some of it's lovely. There's messages from my family, from friends on there, but it's also other things that are then kind of requiring you to reply or a voice note to listen to. And sometimes I just find it gets quite overwhelming. I live in a different time zone to a lot of some of my friends. So often they'll send the messages overnight, and it means that they can stack up a little bit. And while that's absolutely wonderful and I want to hear from them, it needs to be in my own time and when I'm ready to, not at 6 a.m. when I wake up. So I have a really hard boundary of, I will only use my phone to use my meditation app. I use the app Calm. I really recommend it for anyone. And to just really set that boundary with myself of, I will not let in the day until I'm ready, until I've had my morning smoothie, until I am ready and prepared for it. My book number 5, it is another boundary book because you just can never have too many boundaries that are healthy. This is a book by Melissa Urban. So she's not a psychologist or a therapist like the last author, but she is someone who has really had to set boundaries for her own mental health. She is a businesswoman. She's also a former addict, and she's very open about talking how she failed the first time that she went into rehab and came back out because she had not set any healthy boundaries among her friends of saying, I cannot be at a party with drugs. I need to leave. Do not offer me drugs, and all those really important boundaries that protected herself and her sanity. And one of the things that I think is absolutely great that Melissa Urban includes is this traffic light system for our boundaries. So she has a green one of a boundary of, for example, no, sorry, I don't lend friends money. To then a yellow boundary. I've already told you that's not going to happen. To a red boundary of, I cannot keep being friends with you if you keep requesting money from me. It's just one example. And so I think that can be really, really helpful to think about that traffic light system when we're habit building as well of the things that we want. And I think we make it really clear, like a boundary is not about controlling other people. It's about having a healthy life for yourself and healthy space and what you allow in your space. And she has a really good example of this where she talks about Uncle so-and-so's smoking in your house and you tell him, no, you cannot smoke in my house. You can't tell him to stop smoking and give up because that's controlling him. It's about what you allow in your space. And I think that was a really helpful distinction for me as well, that made me see, oh, no, it's not about other people. It's very much about yourself and what you allow in. And I think that's incredibly important for habit setting. it's also important because of the consistency that is needed. So, people say there's that phrase out there of 21 days to build a habit. That's talked about in one of my later books too. And that actually it can take a lot longer, particularly when it comes to boundaries. I think of constantly having to be very focused and disciplined. And I think as a teacher, we find this in the classroom, like you can't just say things 3 times and you have to follow through on whatever it is you're going to say. So if you're going to say to them, to the students, oh, I'm going to check homework every Tuesday, you need to check it every Tuesday, or they are going to see that you are not consistent and they're going to mess up. And that's not on them. That would be on me as a teacher for not being consistent with that habit and that boundary. Okay, so number 6 is probably one of the big habit books out there by James Clear. It is called Atomic Habits. I think this book was really, I'd seen this book quoted all over the place before I came to reading it. And it's a really good read for motivating yourself and kind of inspiration. James talks a little bit about some of his personal journeys that he's been on. So he was due to be a professional athlete and he got injured, and kind of his obsession with habits came out of needing to rehabilitate himself from his injury. And I think it's always nice when the authors have that personal connection with you around habits too. Like, this is what worked for me. Atomic Habits is quite academic because he talks a lot about the research, the neuroscience behind things. So I found that really, really interesting too. But it's definitely a bit more of a challenging read, I would say, than say Melissa Urban's Book of Boundaries. I think one of my main things that I learned was what he says about, in order to kind of keep good habits, is 4 things. So they have to be obvious, they have to be easy, they have to be attractive, and it has to be satisfying. So if I was trying to build a habit of working out when I came back from work, I would need to make it obvious. So I already need to have my yoga mat out there so I can see it and it's obvious. I'd need to make it easy. I need to have already made a decision of this is what I'm going to do. And that also helps with that decision fatigue, where we're making too many decisions in the day. And that's often one of the reasons why we can fail at our habits. It has to be attractive. So it has to be something that I want to do, that I make it attractive. For example, already leaving my workout clothes out, and perhaps also maybe I enjoy wearing those clothes. That might be part of making it attractive. And it has to be satisfying. So afterwards, I have to feel good about myself, which is very likely with yoga. There's the other end of that, which is for breaking bad habits, which I think is really important because not that many people had spoken about that in some of the habit books I've been reading, which are the 4 things. So they are: make it invisible, unattractive, difficult, and unsatisfying. So one of these things might be, I want to spend less time on social media. I'm spending too much time doom scrolling. So make it invisible. I actually, on my phone, I have put social media in like a separate folder so that you actually have to go into a few different clicks on my phone to access it. And while this doesn't totally stop me from doom scrolling, I think it's really helpful to just make that friction, make it a bit harder. And I don't immediately see it. It's the same thing where I don't want to be picking up my phone. If I put my phone in the other room, I literally just forget about it. I don't know if that's just me, but if you do that too, let me know below. I'm not the only one. And make it unattractive. So perhaps remind myself of like, actually, hey, this is really bad for your mental health. Like, you shouldn't be doom scrolling. There's so many amazing creative things that I could be doing instead. Make it difficult. So that, again, putting it in the other room. Oh, I would have to stand up to go and check my phone. So I'm not going to do that. And make it unsatisfying. So perhaps I try and remind myself, hey, that hit of dopamine you're going to get just from looking at something is not going to carry you forward like other things might. Maybe that's a bad example, but things like that. So the 4 things. And I think that was really helpful. One of the other main things I learned from Atomic Habits is about the environment that you're in can really help you to create good habits. So let's say I wanted to do more regular booktube videos. Okay, if I make myself have a nice environment and a kind of new area for doing that, that starts to link up in my brain. There's some neuroscience behind it. And it's going to make me associate that particular place with that good habit. So I love this idea. I was sharing it with one of my friends who recently moved to countries, and I was saying, oh, it's such a fantastic time to like start new habits because you're in a totally new place, and that can kind of give your brain a do-over, and then you associate it less with perhaps where you did some of your bad habits, like if you were smoking, for example. So I thought that was really interesting, some of the neuroscience behind that James Clear shares. Okay, so book number 7 is The Happiness Revolution by Andy Cope and Professor Paul McGee, who are 2 British researchers. And I love how this was linked with happiness. And it has this manifesto. It's written in a really fun way. I actually bought it for my best friend at home after I read it. It's got these really heartwarming stories at the end. But in terms of how it relates to habits, it has some really nice things about self-compassion. So, okay, if you don't manage to do your habit every day, then, just be kind to yourself and be your own bestie. It basically says is one of the things in there. And I really like the idea of like not beating yourself up because you didn't do something, because actually if you're too harsh on yourself, then you probably will fall off the wagon of your good habit. So I think that's really important, is to treat ourselves with grace. I think there was a lot in this book to do with mindset and self-belief and not aligning yourself with, well, I'm someone who doesn't do sport, so I couldn't possibly pick up a new sport. And James Clear had a bit about that in his book as well, of like, if you believe you are the kind of person that will do that, then you can be. And it's connected with our psychology and what we believe about ourselves. So we have to be really mindful of the kind of language that we use when we talk to ourselves. Like if I say, oh, I'm not sporty, then I'm not going to be sporty. But if I say I'm a person who can play sport, play squash, that's my latest sport that I've been playing. And so I think that's really helpful. I like this book because it's not about any kind of short-term habit fixes. It's really about like long-term development of happiness. And I think it's really worth a read. Okay, so number 8 is this book called Tiny Experiments. It is by Anne-Laure LeCunff, who is a neuroscientist. And it was just a really interesting read from Anne-Laure. She used to work for Google and was in this kind of high-flying job. Something happened to her health-wise, and she kind of started to look at her life and was like, this isn't making me happy. So then she was like, right, I'm going to go work at a startup. Maybe that will be more fulfilling. And she basically got burnt out again, which impacted her health. And then she realized, no, something is going on. I need to stop this. And she decided to go back to university and she studied neuroscience. And this is just a lovely kind of idea of treating your life and building habits that are out of curiosity and playfulness. The little tag on it is how to live freely in a goal-obsessed world. And I think that is very appropriate for our habit one, because we do get obsessed with habits. We do get obsessed with our goals and whether we're meeting them or not. And this was just a really lovely idea of that we don't have to take everything so seriously, and it can be fun to pursue goals and try things out. So there are a few of my main takeaways from this. One is called the pact method, which is where you make like a little pact with yourself. It's kind of like a different idea to the SMART targets, which some of you might have heard about in a corporate or professional context. And it's just about, hey, I'm going to try this thing for a certain amount of time, and then I'm going to assess and see if it was useful, helpful, brought me joy or not. And I love this idea of it not being like too tied to anything. She wants to make it clear that it's not about having a habit. It's about trying things out and experimenting, hence the tiny experiments. And there was one other takeaway that I really liked. My partner, he works from home. And I said, oh, I really like this idea of, particularly if you're an entrepreneur or you're someone who runs your own business, that you do something called plus minus next journaling. So every day, at the end of the day, Anne, she takes a moment to write down plus, so that's the positives of the day, minus maybe what didn't go so well, and next, what she's going to do the next day as a result of kind of that mini reflection. And I thought that's such an achievable, nice habit to get into. I really, really liked that. I think there were some other quite big ideas in here about the way we view time. And there's 2, I think it was Greek words about time, which is about kairos and chronos, which is whether we see time as linear. It expresses quality rather than quantity, which is quite a big idea. And I feel like I'm still grappling with it. I was reading this in the evening before sleep. So I think there was quite a lot there to unpack. Like some of it is fairly academic and quite heavy, but like more serious to digest. So yeah, I think that idea of kairos and chronos and time and how we view time is very interesting, and definitely one of the like key takeaways from the book for me. Okay, my next 3 books are actually by kind of someone who's called the Queen of Happiness, and I think a lot of it's built in with habits as well, and that is Gretchen Rubin. I first listened to Gretchen Rubin on a podcast, which is often where I get recommendations for books, and she wrote a book called The Happiness Project. Now, I love this idea, and I've started implementing things. So Gretchen looked at her life and she said, right, I'm pretty happy, but there are areas of my life where I could be happier. And she then comes up with this 12-month plan of one thing she's going to tackle each month in order to try and kind of implement more happiness in her life. I love that she is so open about the things that she does and quite vulnerable. She talks about kind of trying to improve her relationship and her marriage and her kids. And it's just really nice. I'm going to read you some of the things that she does. So January, she starts off with a boost in energy because she thinks that's going to help with all the rest of it. So there were certain habits that she was doing. One of the main things was kind of think yourself energetic, which I do think can happen, right? If I come home and I just collapse in front of the sofa and I watch TV, then yeah, obviously I'm going to feel a bit meh and not want to go out and do anything. So I think that's a big one. February, she decides to work on her marriage. I love it. She does this one thing and she calls it the week of extreme nice. And she goes around and does things that are really, really nice for her husband. And then she's really annoyed at him because she doesn't realize that she's doing things that are extremely nice. And then she realizes actually that's quite a positive thing, that like I'm not normally being horrible to him. So he's not surprised I'm doing nice things. So I don't know, I just loved that. I thought it was quite quirky. She did some things for aiming higher with work, lighten up with parenthood. She wanted to kind of be more playful with her kids and not take everything so seriously and mess around a bit more. I love that she started going to a book club. She started her own one, particularly for childhood literature. And I think this is just a really nice way that you can start to build habits, because it's almost links in with that tiny experiments book of, oh, I'm going to try this for a month and see if it's working, and then continue with what does and let go what doesn't. And I really enjoyed that. One of the things I quite liked was that she did a focus on money for some of it. And I thought that was quite interesting because I've been reading a few money books lately. And she said about, she's actually quite like not a spender, like she wants to kind of save everything. And so she tried to do like one really nice splurge for herself on things. And I thought, oh, that's really lovely, like to feel that you can treat yourself. And I think I definitely had already implemented some of the things that she recommends in the book. She doesn't get on very well with meditation, but that's one of the big things that I took on as a daily habit that I do every day, pretty much without fail, is 10 minutes of meditation. So yeah, I'm kind of obsessed with Gretchen Rubin, to be honest. The next 2 books, I'm also going to reference her. So one of them is called Better Than Before. And this book is actually all about our habits. And she has come up with this really interesting theory. And I think it's so helpful for how we understand habits. So Gretchen came up with this idea that we have these tendencies. She calls them the 4 tendencies. And it's to do with how we can implement and maintain habits. So the 4 types of person are an obliger, an upholder, a rebel, and a questioner. So an upholder is someone who does not have trouble implementing new habits. They can make a decision and decide, yeah, tomorrow I'm going to start meditating and I'm going to do it every day, and they do it every day without fail. It could also be someone implements something at work and they say, yeah, absolutely, I'm going to do that, and they're an upholder. Gretchen herself, she's a little bit of an upholder. There are the questioners. So that is people who, okay, I'm going to think about that habit, and if it works for me, then I will implement it. But really, I have a lot of questions about it first, and I need to see if I think it would be useful. So I'm a little bit of a questioner. Like if I can see the use of something, and perhaps I've done some research like into the benefits of meditation, then yes, okay, I think a daily meditation habit is really going to benefit me. However, if I'm told at work, like, you need to do this thing and you need to do it every month, and I'm thinking there's no benefit to my students, there's no benefit for me, then I'm much less likely to do that. The rebels, I feel like we probably all know a rebel. I teach a lot of teenagers. I think a lot of teenagers are rebels. This is where it's quite challenging for these people to implement habits because they just do not want to do it. Even if it's a habit that they want and they tell themselves that they want to do it, they find it incredibly challenging. So what works most for these people is kind of trying to do things on impulse, but it is one of the hardest types to be able to implement your good habits. Then there are the obligers. And I thought this was quite interesting because I've definitely come across some of these types of people in my life, some of my friends, where you cannot set a habit for yourself, but if like an authority person does it or an accountability partner, then you will be able to do it. So this is where people who kind of go, oh, okay, I need to go to the coffee shop and meet up with other people in a co-working space so that I will work. Or, okay, I need an outside entity to tell me what to do and then I will do it. I think that's really interesting. And those people are the obligers. So they need to feel obliged in order to do something. They can't have that self-discipline to do it themselves. And this made me think a lot about some of my students, because I was thinking, oh yeah, if I don't oblige them to go and do revision for their exam, then some of those people who fall into the tendency of obliger, they're not going to feel like they can do it because of that self-discipline issue. So I think this is really helpful just in general with relationships and understanding people's habits. So yeah, Better Than Before, I found really, really useful for that. The third Gretchen Rubin book that I'm going to mention is Happier at Home, which was very, very similar to the Happiness Project, but it was only focusing on home things. So I can't remember if she did a full year for this one or she did the 9 months, perhaps academic year. But it was just about those nice little things that you're going to do around the house to make a home. Now, as someone who's moved quite a few times in my life, often to different countries, I have often moved into new apartments, and making a home is really important for me because I do move around. So I really love kind of things to do with not just interior design, but making somewhere homely. And so this book is all about kind of having those habits and those intentions and the things that make things feel like a home. It was kind of small little shifts in daily routines, like having fun breakfast things with the kids, which I thought was quite sweet. And things like kind of collecting things that kind of make you happy and bring you joy, having important like filing systems that keep you organized. I quite like that because I love being organized, so I fall into Gretchen's kind of type A personality in that camp. So yeah, I think if you like the Happiness Project, it's kind of maybe a tamer version of it, but I quite enjoyed it, and I feel like it's useful in that habit building universe as well. Okay, my next two books are very much health focused books to do with setting habits, and they're along the same idea of this. We're going to spend 1 year focusing on something. So one of them was by a writer called Phoebe Lapine, who I'd not come across before. She's actually a chef and a food writer, and she has a blog called Feed Me Phoebe, which sounds quite fun. She actually has an autoimmune disease called Hashimoto's, which I'd never heard of before. But since I've read that book, that thing to do with noticing, I now have heard a few people who suffer from Hashimoto's. And it's the tagline for the book is how to do right by her body without like giving up her life. So basically, how could she still find the pleasure in every day without giving up the things that brought her joy? She, similar to Gretchen Rubin, she does one thing a month. So she focuses on sleep 1 month, which was really interesting. She focuses on trying to cut out sugar on one of the months and exercise on one of them, and starts to kind of, do those experiments and learn what works for her and what doesn't. It was one of those nice things where she was quite compassionate with herself of like, okay, like this is good enough, and okay, I'm going to take like that one thing through. Like she tried out all these crazy exercise classes where she lived, and then she just went, oh my god, no, like that's too much, how can anyone keep up with that, like I'm exhausted. And obviously things like that were also impacting her autoimmune disease. And I thought one of the things was quite interesting was the idea of the skincare, and she did some research into all these different things that we use on our faces. And so that was quite interesting. She looks into some of the science behind things. I'm always interested in gut health. And there's a whole month where she focuses just on the gut. So I found that really interesting. She also talks a little bit about her personal life. And one of the main things is that she started dating someone, and it becomes serious during the book, and they're talking about moving in together, but he has a dog and she's not totally pro Baron the Beagle. And so she talks a lot about the shifting in sleep and things like that, and also some of the boundary things are wrapped up in that, like her partner is used to sleeping with the dog in the bed, which she is obviously not. And so she says, no, like, this is a hard boundary. He cannot come in the bedroom. And her partner respected that and said, yes, okay, I understand. And that compromise with a partner I thought was really interesting for Phoebe's book too. And she actually found out some things for gut health that pets can actually help us to have a good balance of things in our environment and in our guts. So I thought that was quite interesting too. 13 is called The Self-Care Solution. And again, it's one of these books of implementing one thing a month. I actually kind of went on a bit of a deep dive to try and seek out some of these books because I do find them quite inspiring. And this book is by someone who is very well known in the US, but I've not heard of before. She's called Dr. Jennifer Ashton. She's actually on Good Morning America and is one of the chief medical correspondents there. So I'm sure lots of you will recognize her. She has a little bit lacking some of the self-compassion that Phoebe Lapine had for her. And I do found Jennifer Ashton's approach very, very severe. I think she's clearly quite a type A Gretchen Rubin style person where like everything has to be, and she was quite strict with herself about things. I definitely think she's quite a workaholic after I've read this book. So while I found it inspiring in some suggestions, in others I was quite shocked by her approach. If you've read it, I'd love to know what you thought. I gave it to my best friend to read and she agreed with me that she found it quite like severe in some of the discipline items and that she was definitely working like every hour of the day, which was just a bit terrifying to me, where I'm all about balance and that life balance for sure. One of the nice ones I thought was about hydration. Like I know loads of us don't drink enough water. I probably drink more tea than I drink of water, so that made me think about it. And one of the nice things that I implemented over the summer holidays, which I'm not still doing right now, was about doing planks and push-ups like every morning. And I got really good at this for about 3 months, but it's not a habit that I'm still doing, but I might try and get back into it. Again, it's that struggle of waking up early. How much earlier do I want to wake up than I need to implement some of these things, and perhaps where else can I implement it? I thought one of the things that was quite interesting is that Jennifer Ashton found it so difficult to implement the no sugar rule. I think this is where loads of us fail with our habits, is that we are so severe that our brain then goes, that's what I want, that's what I want. And she completely failed. And she said she actually ended up eating more sugary things like desserts than she would have normally, because she made it too severe in her head of like, I cannot have any sugar. And then that's all her brain could crave because she kind of focused on that so much. And I think that's a really important lesson for loads of us, right? Like if we try and go so, all or nothing with something, it can actually have an adverse effect. So I found that really interesting. And I did cut back on sugar for a month as a result of this, but I didn't say I'm not going to ever have any sugar, like processed sugar, I mean like chocolate on desserts. But I did say that I'm not going to have any chocolate for like the next month. I did do a dry 4 weeks as well. Apparently dry January was not very well known in the US, like at this point. In the UK, it's very normal. A lot of people do dry January, and so a sober January with no alcohol in the UK. So I was quite surprised that she hadn't heard of that when I was reading this book. But it was published a few years ago, so perhaps things are more well known now. But I do think it's great to just have those, maybe to even 2 months a year of like just not drinking, just for our own health, and also a little reminder of like, why are you drinking? What pleasure are you getting out of it? Those kind of reminders that I think are good for all of us who do consume alcohol. Okay, number 14. I actually did a whole video on this book here, so you can go and watch that here. This is a book called Get Rich Lucky Bitch by Denise Duffield Thomas, who is a money mindset coach. And it was the first time I'd ever read a book like this. I've actually since read 2 more money books, so I have a whole money playlist coming soon. So subscribe if you're interested in that. But this is really not about telling you where to put your investments. She's not a financial advisor, but it's about our mindset for money and how limited we are in our beliefs and what we think. And I found, oh my God, I'm actually really limited. And I started to do a bit of a deep dive into why I might feel so limited in my money mindset. Like for me, I just have always thought, well, I would never become a millionaire. I'm a teacher. And it's not necessarily one of my goals in life, but it's really interesting to think, oh, I never thought that was possible. And maybe now I do. Now I've opened up some of my limited beliefs. One of my main beliefs that I got from this was about like how I feel a lot of really, really rich, wealthy people are not kind and not generous, which obviously isn't true. So it was really good for challenging beliefs. But it's in my habit list because she really talks about manifesting habits, about the law of attraction, which does link in with neuroscience before anyone starts to think it's all hippie and woo-woo. And she talks about tracking your money so you know exactly where things are going. So making that like a daily habit or a weekly habit. So that's something that I've actually implemented since, to really see like, well, where am I spending my money and what's it going on? Is it going on things that align with my values or not? And I think that's a huge takeaway from me, is to make sure you're building wealth and spending your wealth on things that align for you. And I think there were some really nice like affirmations that she talks about and kind of some daily things that we can do like that. I loved one of her things that like when you have a goal that you're trying to reach, you kind of put it everywhere on post-its around the house. You make it your password for things as well. So I really like some ideas of like that constant reiteration of what you want to achieve. Okay. Number 15 is totally different from the money one. And this is all about creativity. This is Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. And for those of you who don't know, Elizabeth Gilbert's main book that she is most famous for is Eat, Pray, Love, which I've also referenced on a few other playlists. And I loved this book. It's a non-fiction book all about creativity, tapping into your creative side, whether you're an artist, a poet, a writer, so many things there that we can be creative about. And it was really about not necessarily having habits about it, but making sure you carve out time to be creative, and all these different ways that people are creative, which I thought was so inspiring. Really trying to detach from that perfectionist streak that a lot of people have. I'm quite lucky. I don't tend to do that. I'm like, no, that's good enough. That's fine. But I know that lots of people struggle with perfectionism, and just really trying to get away from the fear of being creative and embracing it. And it doesn't have to be, oh, I'm going to, give up my stable job to go and be an artist. Like all of those things can coexist together. And I think it was a really lovely reminder of that. She had some fascinating things in there, which kind of do sound very hippie and out there and woo-woo, but they were just amazing. Like there's this one story she tells about a poet she was talking to, and this poet feels a poem coming towards her down the hill, and she has to race into her house, and then she writes down the whole poem backwards as the poem kind of flows through, and if she doesn't get there in time, then the poem is lost. And I thought, wow, like it just really opened my mind. Like that's incredible. There were other things where Elizabeth Gilbert thinks an idea is kind of out there floating around, and that if you have that idea but you don't do anything with it, then that idea might float away and go and find someone else, and that person might actually end up doing something similar or writing a similar book to you because you didn't capture that idea then. And she has a real life example of this with another writer, Anne Pratchett, who I've also read some of her books. So yeah, just really eye-opening things all about our creativity. I think creativity should be built into our daily, weekly habits. And so yeah, that's why this really inspiring book is on my list. Okay, I got another out of the curve book for you. It is called Tea and Cake with Demons by Adriana Limbach, who is a Buddhist practitioner and also very pro-meditation. So I thought this book was just lovely. It was recommended to me by one of my friends, and it's all about building your self-worth, which I think should be a daily habit for many of us. And it looks at a lot of the Buddhism principles and like kind of how we can apply them to our own life, which I really enjoyed learning more about Buddhism because I live in a Buddhist country. I live in Thailand. And so I really enjoyed learning about the noble truths and how we can kind of apply some of these ancient principles and wisdoms to our own daily lives now in the modern world. As usual, meditation was one of the big one of them, but so is also journaling, practicing self-compassion, lots of things to kind of build up our self-worth, which I think is really important for habits, because I think if we're trying to break a bad habit and we don't feel good about ourselves, then I think we are more likely to fall back into those bad habits. So I think building up your self-esteem, what you feel worthy of achieving, being able to do is really, really linked with breaking bad habits and cultivating new ones. Number 17 is The Happiness Advantage by Shaker. So I actually read this book after watching Sean's TED Talk, which I have mentioned before on this booktube channel. And he is a researcher at Harvard, and he researches happiness. And he did this fantastic TED Talk. I'll link it below for you guys to watch after. But it's all very based on kind of positive psychology. It's a very funny talk as well, and how kind of what we put in is what we're going to do. And he talks a lot about journaling, about gratitude journaling. One of the main kind of habits that I took away and I try to implement regularly is like in the workplace, trying to send like that positive email or message to someone. So I try and do this with my kids. Every kind of half term, I try and send a positive email home to at least one of the kids in every single one of my classes to really put that positive thing out. I think sometimes parents, they don't really hear from the teachers unless it's a negative thing. And I really don't want that to be out there. I don't think that aligns with my beliefs or with positive psychology or with any of it. So I really want to, catch them doing things right and then email home about that and say, all the wonderful positive things about our young people. So I think that was one of my big takeaways from The Happiness Advantage, which I think really applies to the corporate world as well, right? Like someone did something nice for you or inspired you, like send them an email, let them know. And I think that's a really lovely way for someone to start the day. There's a lot more in the book about kind of positive mindsets. He talks a lot about that 21 days to kind of set habits. But again, like I said, I think it can be easy to fall out of that. Like over the summer holidays, I did my planks and push-ups every day without fail. I started maybe the first 2 weeks back at work, and now it's just gone totally out of my mind. So that was definitely like at least 3 months of doing a habit, and I haven't managed since. So that's quite interesting, really, isn't it? That maybe it takes a lot longer and consistent motivation to build a habit. And perhaps it's something that I'm just not prioritizing right now. So yeah, I think that also comes into habit building. Okay. So this one is a bit of a curveball to have in my habit playlist because it is a relationship advice book, which I absolutely love. I love the Gottmans. If you've not heard of them, Dr. and Dr. Gottman are a married couple who've done some of the longest running research into what makes a successful relationship and a happy marriage. They have studied hundreds of thousands of couples in what they call their love lab and collated it all together in order to help us be more successful in our relationships. And I don't think this just applies to romantic relationships. I think these things apply to any close relationships that we have. So, of the main things they talk about in this book, Fight Right, is about our communication and how we can be better at it, which I think most of us can be, definitely me, and about kind of how to have effective arguments that promotes being closer in the relationship as a result of those arguments. And I have had some of those where you have an argument and then you're like, oh my gosh, I never thought about it like that. I never realized that about you. And you suddenly feel much closer to your partner or to your friend. And I think that's one of my main takeaways from this book. And I think this should be part of our habits in how we approach people or don't approach people. So I'm going to start with the negatives, which is the Gottmans talk about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, which are 4 really awful things that we can do in our relationships with people. So one of them is criticism. One of them is contempt. So that kind of like mocking, looking down on people. One of them is defensiveness. So not kind of being open to listening. And one of them is stonewalling. So that going really quiet, like refusing to talk to someone, which I'm sure we're probably all capable of some of these, and we have probably all been on the receiving end of some of these. And I think for me, some of the criticism things, like that can be a habit, like, oh, that person's doing something differently to me, so I'm going to criticize them. And I think it's a really good reminder to not allow that to be a habit and to be very intentional with your words. I think I really like some of this book because I can be quite confrontational in my relationships, and it wasn't saying that that's a bad thing. Like, it was saying it's the way that we do it, and that actually, when people are avoiding confrontation, that also needs to be addressed. So to really help different partners and the way that they have conflict kind of come together. And they have a lot of different kind of principles of how you should come about that. And I think one of the main things was called the gentle startup, which is to not go in with, oh my gosh, you didn't recycle the things properly today. And I can't believe you forgot. I've always told you this is how it's supposed to be done. But to use that gentle startup. I feel sad when you don't recycle properly because the environment's one of my values. And that is much more likely to get a positive result, better conversation about the conflict. I love that it was talking about our repair attempts. Like, I think when we have conflict and one of, if someone makes a joke or is light-hearted or reaches across and, taps, touches you on the shoulder or holds your hand, all of those are repair attempts to de-escalate, and that things can really come down from conflict with that, which I think is important, not just in our romantic relationships where we probably have the most conflict, but also if you're dealing with teenagers, there can be quite a lot of conflict there about how they're feeling about things, and just looking at that moment and trying to de-escalate it, I think is everything. And I think can be really, really valuable information here for anyone in all sorts of different relationships. I also loved that, when we have these kind of little conflict things, there were two key things that I got from it, which was one, most conflicts, I can't remember if it was 70 or 80% of them, are perpetual. So it's not going to be solved. It's going to be an ongoing conflict in your relationship because of how you are two completely different people. So it's not just going to be oh, okay, where are we going to hang this picture? And then it's done and dusted. That would be in the 30% of conflict about that. Most of them are perpetual because of how we grew up and our differences. And I think that was really helpful to know that. I think everyone should know that. There are always going to be things that you don't see eye to eye on, and that's okay. It's really about how you treat each other and treating each other with respect. I also love that lots of the conflicts actually come into our deeper dreams about how we feel about the world. And I just thought that was so lovely. So they have a lot of case studies in the book, and one of them was about a retired couple. And his dream was to go off on a boat, and her dream was to retire to the farm. And it just felt like they were at a crossroads, because how could they possibly do both their dreams? And then they started talking about it and, well, why is that so important to you? And they really came to an understanding that could help both of them. And they decided to go off for 6 months on the boat and then come back to the farm. And just things that, even where you think there is no room for compromise, there very often is, I think, apart from, some very key things like they mentioned if one partner wants children and the other one really doesn't. Sometimes there are times where there is no compromise, but for the most part, I really think there are, and it felt quite hopeful for those type of things. So my next book I have mentioned once. I'm still actually in the middle of it because it's quite a gritty read. It is Invisible Women by Caroline Criado Perez, who is a British author and journalist, and she's pushed for a lot of policy changes in the UK as a result of data gaps. So it's basically, the whole book is about how there is not equality in the world and people are not looking at the data properly. And it's absolutely astounding. When you read one of those books and every page you want to look up and be like, oh my God, I can't believe this. And you want to tell someone about it because you're so in shock. That is one of these books. So from things like phones are made for male size hands. So for any of you guys with small hands, that's why they're so uncomfortable, because they are made for a larger, quite often white male. And you're like, this is ridiculous. And that's why they don't fit in our pockets, that we're very often not given as well. So she's actually looking at all these things from kind of technology to health to policies, and all these times where women have basically been ignored because we're not included in the data, whether that is female cells being used in the lab, or whether it is pregnancy, parking for pregnant women in businesses. And I think this is one of the really good things, and I'm linking it to habits, because we need to notice these things as a habit and as an ongoing thing to realize, where are we not being inclusive in life? It's really made me think about some things at my school where I work. all the cleaners, and I don't know if this is maybe a cultural thing, but it shouldn't matter actually, all the cleaners where I work are female. And I've been thinking since reading this book, like, what a message to send to the young people at school. Like, oh, you think that someone who's going to clean up after you is always going to be female? And I think that's really damaging, and it's something I'm going to bring up in the next meeting. So yeah, I think we all need to be looking at this as part of our habits in how everything in our daily lives can be affected by not being inclusive. So that's why I think it's a really important book when we talk about our habits. And our last book, number 20, is one of the best books I've ever read. I absolutely love this. It is called 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals by Oliver Burkeman. Now, Oliver was a columnist for one of the big newspapers in England, for The Guardian. And he used to write a productivity column. So he'd try out all these hacks for how to be productive, how to build good habits, how to get more out of your day. And then he realized that is not the point of life. And he wrote this book. And it's so uplifting, inspiring. It's one of those books that I'm just going to reread like every few months, because it's full of such important reminders of productivity doesn't equal a meaningful life. And you can't fit in everything you want to do into every day. And so you have to say no to things, and you have to decide not to be productive in certain areas so that you can focus on others. And it's just like a book everyone should read, like a breath of fresh air, because I do love these productivity books and I do love reading books about habits, but it's not all possible. And this is such a good reminder of the things that matter in life and what's important. He talks about those things of like people trying to get to 0 emails. Oh, well, being a habit, every morning when I come into work, I'm going to get to 0 emails. And it's like, why? When you send out emails and reply to things, you just get more back in, which I think is so true. So he's such a good kind of reminder of really what is meaningful in life. And you can't do everything. And actually having limitations on that is beautiful, because it means we're going to do things that align with our values, and that we shouldn't be doing things that don't align with the kind of meaningful life that we want. And it's just absolutely beautiful. I'm gonna reread it again and do a whole booktube just on this one. Yes. So let me know if you've read any other habit books, or even books that aren't totally associated with habits but that inspired you. Hopefully you can go read some of these books now and see if it does help you to cultivate some good habits or break any bad ones. I'd love to know what you guys thought of some of these books.